So today for ethical topic, I want to do a broad category called environmental issues. I'm going to kill this pen today. I knew I should have got a fresh one. All right, so environmental issues for today. And traditionally, man, I cannot tell you how much the evangelical community has changed on this one in the last 30 years. This was normally seen as like a liberal left-wing action item. And if you supported environmentalism, you were one of them, part of that team. And most conservative evangelicals were just like, hey, look, in Genesis, it said God gave us dominion over the earth. And if you're familiar, if you want to do like a blue letter Bible search or something of that word, it's a really powerful word. It's like a picture word. So imagine someone's heel on another person's neck or throat. That's the kind of imagery dominion carries. So man is given dominion over the earth. And so a lot of Christians went with this idea of what we would call dominion theology. But starting in, I'd say, the late 60s, maybe early 70s in the United States, we started to get a new movement and a new reading of man's role with creation. And the emphasis here is what we call stewardship. The idea behind stewardship theology is the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And God made the world for his glory, for his pleasure, and placed humans as stewards or caretakers of his world. This is God made the world for us, and we can use it as we will. This is God made the world for himself, allowed us to live in it, and made us like the gardeners or caretakers of the world. And we can find both of these in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, probably the first 5 chapters of Genesis. And so what I want you to think about, in the book I used before this class with Geisler, he wanted to make a distinction between pantheist and theist on this issue. And if you remember in the beginning, in the preface of my book, I have the worldview wheel. And pantheists see God and nature as synonyms. And so Geisler's big problem was a lot of these environmentalists, they're not protecting nature, they're worshiping nature. They've made it like an idol, like their highest good, or they've turned nature itself into God. And yeah, got it. I'm with you, Geisler. That's not what I'm talking about. From a theist approach, he, interestingly enough, because we didn't agree on a lot of issues, but we actually did agree on this one. And he pointed out, if you look at verses like Revelations 4:11, it tells us all things were made for the glory of God and belong to him. So this idea that the earth belongs to us, I think you have to take in that whole context of we are made a part of this creation, but we are not the creators, and we have to give an account to how we use what God had given us. So I agree with him. Let's not worship the creation or confuse it with the creator. The problem here is a lot of Christians have this kind of apocalyptic mentality that the earth's going to burn. And so why not use all the resources we can before God torches it with fire? And this was really big when I was growing up in Christian circles in the 60s and 70s. And on the other end of that spectrum, so I don't know what you would want to call it. Let's just put dominion on this end. And then I met a bunch of very liberal people in my youth. I call them beautiful people, kind of like second generation hippies. And they went so far as to even start forming groups called things like Earth First. Have you heard of them? Anyone heard of Earth First? Greenpeace?
We've heard of Greenpeace, yeah.
Greenpeace, I would put like in the middle of the road. Well, maybe a little to the right or left. Sierra Club, we could throw them maybe just slightly to the right of middle. Groups like this. But Earth First, their idea was, hey, no compromise in defense of Mother Earth. But you start to see that almost pantheist feel, right? Referring to Earth like your mother. She's the one that gave us life. She's the one that nurtures us, provides for our needs. And this is actually a militant environmental group where they'll like spike trees, they'll put sand and gravel and gasoline tanks of like heavy equipment operators, all that kind of stuff. You've seen Greenpeace try to interfere with whaling fleets and ships, try to get in between them and the whales. And so they're not just passive, they're not just writing letters. These people are out actively engaging, trying to preserve. And we could talk about varying degrees. I'm not happy with any of my pens today. Okay. We could have people on the one hand that are stewards. Then we could have like conservationists. But then there's an even more extreme, which I would call preservationist. So this is the idea that, yes, the world does belong to God, but we are allowed to use it. We can use trees for lumber, we can eat animals, we can use their skins for clothing, et cetera, et cetera. The conservationists are saying, okay, sure, we can use stuff, but it's a zero-sum game. We're kind of like on this giant terrarium. And see, a lot of the national psyche changed after the space program. And we had the first images coming back from space of the Earth. And here was this beautiful blue ball in the middle of space. And we realized, holy cow, we're all connected. The air, the water, we're like in this big terrarium. And if we poop or pollute or destroy in one part, it's going to have a global effect. And so there was a much more global awareness after we got that perspective from space of how precarious our position was. And so these people are saying, yes, we can use it, but let's conserve our fossil fuels. Let's do renewable energy. Let's recycle. Let's get the most we can out of this world we have. And then the preservationists are the most extreme, and they're saying humans are almost like a plague or a virus. And I must admit, I have shared this feelings at times. If you're up on a mountaintop at night and you look down and you see the lights of the cities and they're just spread like almost this growth, and the arteries and veins of the freeways just going out throughout the country. And so their idea is, look, we've already defiled most of the planet. Let's try to preserve what's left. And so they're really big pushers on like wilderness areas, preserves where you can't use any mechanized energy, you can't hunt, you can't harvest, you can't mine. It's just, let's leave this alone. We're already using most of the other stuff, but let's save. And it would be extreme. Like, could you imagine having national parks where no people are allowed to go in there because people are being viewed as like a parasite or a virus? And it's interesting. I love having friends in all these different camps. Well, I even have some Dominion folks, but I don't know if I call them friends. we could have conversations. And so what I want you to do, like with all of these issues, what is the biblical precedent? Like I was telling you, my little process. First, I try to look, has God spoken on this topic in the past? Whew, I got to take a breather after that. So talk to me for a minute. From your knowledge of Scripture, does God tell us how we should behave regarding the creation?
I could be facetious and say God cursed the fig tree and because it didn't bear fruit, so we just curse everything, burn it to the ground.
All nation is under a curse.
That's a joke.
But that's one of my favorite passages in Romans 8, is not only are humans being reconciled to God, but it tells us we're like the first fruits of reconciliation. And that all creation itself is going to be redeemed. Now, there's a paradox for me theologically, because we have some passages telling us the whole world's going to be rolled up like a scroll, like the heavens rolled up like a scroll, and the world's going to be destroyed by fire, and God's going to make a new heaven and a new earth. But in Romans 8, it talks about as God is reconciling us to himself through his son, it says all creation groans, waiting for that reconciliation. But the curse came upon creation not because of what creation did. It wasn't because of bad trees or bad animals or bad birds. They were doing what God created them to do. In fact, I think that's part of why I love trees so much. I think they're the least fallen part of creation. And don't get me wrong, I think there's evil trees out there. I've come across a few in my day. And like Elijah brought up, Jesus personally cursed a fig tree that wasn't bearing fruit. And I was telling some people the other day, it's probably why I've never been ordained. It's because I have about 30 pages in my doctrinal statement about how plants and animals can sin. What do you guys think?
What?
Yeah.
So the fact that man fell and creation fell with us, and the fact that creation's liberation is directly tied to our glorification seems to, or doesn't seem to, plainly suggest that there is some intimate connection between us and creation.
Thank you.
So I think that alone, if we just take that, then there is some sense where what happens to us affects creation.
Yes.
And so if we start there, I think theologically we can move to then we should take care of creation, or there's some. And as you said, if God's renewing us as new creations, and he's also renewing the physical creation, then in some sense God is also reconciling the world to himself, not just human beings.
Correct.
I think in our Western culture we only think of salvation as the individual going to heaven when they die, rather than a new heavens and a new earth with humans populating it. So I think we start there, we can kind of move to some ethics of ecology.
Thank you. That was good.
Well, I just like to, like, my point is really simple, but like, the way I think of it is like God gave them dominion before they fell. So here was this perfect garden, and God was like, okay, you're going to be able to that garden. But then when they fell, I think that's when it was like, okay, more stewardship of like, okay, yeah, you had your chance, but you wrecked it. So now, this is all you're going to get. Like, this is, you need to take care of it.
Well, that was part of the curse, right? Now you're going to eat by the sweat of your brow.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like before that, the fruit would just drop from the trees and you didn't have to do a lot of labor. And remember, it's before death. I can't even imagine a world without death, because everything we know is that cycle of life, right? Things die, they go back into the earth. From those nutrients, new things grow, and we just see this cycle. And we can even see beauty in that. One of my favorite things in the Olympic Peninsula forest is they have a lot of nurse trees. because the soil isn't so great. So the saplings have to grow on the fallen dead trees. And so you'll see like rows of trees going through the forest that they weren't planted. It was just, they were growing on a dead elder. And there's a beauty in that. But death is a curse. It wasn't meant to be beautiful or renewing or that sort of thing. So I can't even imagine a world where death isn't a part of that process. But even so, we see God's care for the creation, also his destruction of the creation, right? I mean, God can go both ways. But what I want to point out, when we do get the law, when the children of Israel are coming into the land, God gives really specific laws on how they're to behave and to treat the inhabitants of the land, including the plants and animals. And I just think that's super fascinating. There was a lot more compassion on the trees of Canaan than the indigenous people of Canaan, or the Canaanites, right? The Canaanites were to be driven out, but you weren't to cut down trees, you weren't to salt fields, you weren't to fill in wells. I mean, it got so specific. Even if you came across a bird's nest that had fallen from the tree, you were allowed to collect the eggs, but you weren't allowed to harm the mother bird that was trying to protect her young. She was to be let go. And so even when we get into like the Sabbath laws, if you had an ox or a donkey or burro, it got a day of rest just like you did. One day a week, your draft animals got the day off. They didn't have to work. They got to just chill. God even gave Sabbath rest to trees. Once every 7 years, you weren't allowed to prune your trees. You just were to let them go, and you weren't to harvest them. That was it was kind of like a social welfare for the strangers, the widows, the orphans, the immigrants, and for the wild animals. They got to eat from those trees that you hadn't pruned that year. Including, if you're familiar, they weren't to harvest the corners of their crops. They would harvest in like an oval, and then the edges, that was the social welfare program for the poor, the people that didn't have providers, that didn't have property. And another thing, and this is what really brings it home for me, this stewardship idea is the land of Israel did not belong to Israel. It belonged to God. They were like tenants, and their tenancy was dependent or conditional on how they obeyed God and how they treated the land. If they obeyed God, God promised rain to take care of the wild animals, disease, pestilence, war. I mean, even stuff like lions and bears, God said, are not going to harm you if you follow my law. That's really interesting. But if they disobeyed, God said he was going to take the land and boot them out of it, just like he did the people before him. And so it was very much under the law, that tit for tat. You do this, and this is what you get. You do that, and this is the consequences. Even land, we're not talking about organic living things like plants and animals. Even land got a Sabbath once every 7 years, where you weren't to till your field, you were simply to let it be, to go back to its natural state and let it rest for a year. And I'm not interested in the utilitarian parts, but what we've learned from agriculture and farming, the value of rotating crops, of letting fields go fallow for a time, so you're not just draining every single nutrient from those things. The same thing, obviously, with your animals. A well-rested animal, a happy animal is going to do better than an exhausted, half-starved animal. And so I love how we see this care of God, not just for humans and their needs, but also for animals and plants and even the land. Okay, any other thoughts, comments about that?
I was just gonna say the part that you were saying about like animals and plants like spinning.
Yes.
I never like thought about it that way, but it makes sense because again, like when the garden fell, like I don't think it was just like all the animals were probably kicked out too. Like, where then it's like, I don't think it's, like, the way it makes sense in my mind is it's not sin as we think of sin.
Well, define sin first.
Like missing the mark, like doing wrong. And so it's like, it's not like, oh, they're killing their brother or they're making other gods, but it's like they're not acting the way God created them to act.
There you go.
So, okay, so sin is a noun in the sense of not being what you were intended to be. But can they be sinning in the sense of blameworthiness? Do they have moral culpability to be blamed?
There were actually capital offenses in the Mosaic law for animals that killed other animals or humans.
Those laws, I don't think were necessarily because the animals were like intentionally like, I hate God, I'm doing these things against God. No, it's because they weren't able to be controlled and they had done some damage that needed to be rectified. And that was the payment for that. Because you can't have your bull kill another bull because, you know, they're in their natural fighting stance, because then the other owner has lost something, and now you must also lose something too. It's that eye for an eye thing, and not really the bull's a bad bull. That's how I've always viewed that.
But unlike with humans, with the animals, if you knew you had a rogue bull that was causing that harm, if it was killing other bulls, you would have to economically pay for it. But if your rogue bull killed a human, you, the owner of that bull, were culpable along with that bull for that fatality. But that makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's like negligence. Like, I knew that was a dangerous animal and I wasn't. I think we could apply, not to pick on pit bulls, but I think you could apply that same thing. If you know you have a very ferocious animal or dangerous animal, and I know there's lots of sweet pit bulls, all of you devotees, there's such a pit bull devotee club out there, including my family. And I know they can be sweeties, but let's just say any like guard dog or dog you're using for like protection, you have to secure that animal, just like you would secure a weapon or other sorts of things. And I think we could even apply that to negligence. I mean, maybe I'm extrapolating too far, but if you know you got bad brakes or bad tires and you still keep rolling down the highway, it's like you're putting others at risk, not intentionally per se, but by you not taking care of what you need to take care of. In addition to those either weekly Sabbaths or 7-year Sabbaths, there was also a year of Jubilee. And oh my God, if we could apply this, it's just so beautiful. It's just, I do not see how you could apply a system like that unless everyone shared the same worldview, the same religion, the same God, the same values. But the idea behind the year of Jubilee was, remember I told you all the land belonged to God? Which meant the Jews were not allowed to sell their land, but they could lease it up to, like if you started the year after Jubilee, you could do a 49-year lease, but on that 50th year, there's a reset and all the land goes back to the original families. So say you had a dad or a grandpa that wasn't so good with money and made some bonehead deals, or they just weren't really industrious, and you had pretty much lost your family land and your way to make income. At some point in your lifetime, you are probably going to get a chance to start afresh and anew. And could you imagine how much hope that would give people? And so instead of just like a few families over time accumulating 90% of the wealth and property, you get a reset every 50 years and it goes back to redistributing. And then it would happen again, right? Some families would really work it, they'd be disciplined, they'd be creative, and they would get wealth, and others would kind of go down in the pile, but you'd get those resets. I fantasize about that a lot, but I just can't think of any practical way you could apply that unless everyone was on that. I mean, Israel couldn't even do it.
Right, so I've been thinking about this a lot with the Sabbath. So Sabbath was directly tied to economics. And the reason Israel was in exile is because they did not observe the Sabbath. They did not keep the Sabbath rest of the land. They did not do the.
God put them on Sabbath time out.
Yeah, God put them into exile. Now, so Sabbath was directly tied to creation, how you take care of the land, how you take care of people, and economics. And one of the reasons Israel couldn't do it is because of predatory economics. They wanted to continue to accumulate, giving us the land for a year detract from our wealth.
Right.
And so we couldn't stop it because, or Israel couldn't stop it because they wanted to accumulate more wealth, more money, more. So if you tie that to creation, is our understanding of economics the reason why we keep exploiting and extrapolating the land and the resources? Because we're really just trying to accumulate more wealth for ourselves.
Yes. No, that's excellent.
So that might be the main issue with
And think about, I always love the Disney movie Pocahontas, and not just for the story, because it wasn't historically that on track or anything, but I loved the worldview piece of it, because basically they were presenting animist versus almost like theistic naturalist materialist. So here you have the Indians, and I understand it's a lot of hyperbole, but they're just portrayed as living in harmony and peace with the rivers and Grandma Willow and the otters and the rainstorm of my brother. And you just have this idealist landscape. And then you have these white English coming in, and they're not seeing a forest as a community of being. They're seeing board feet of lumber. They're seeing raw materials in which they can cut it down and mill it and then sell it. And they're not seeing like rivers as just this free flowing dance from the mountain to the sea. They're looking at, oh, if we put a dam here, we could store the water, we could create power from water mills, all those sorts of things. They didn't see animals as like autonomous living beings with their own rights and values and hopes, fears, dreams, but like frogs were like little green frog skins, right? Or beaver pelts or hides. And you're seeing things in a utilitarian way, not in how they're a part of the community. And I just love the contrast, because both groups saw the other as savages, dirty, rotten heathens, barbarians, and it was nestled in their worldview. I think both of those are a bit extreme, and I know enough about Native American culture to know it wasn't all ideal. They weren't all just living in perfect peace and harmony together. There was tons of intertribal warfare, slave trade, horror going on. But there was this sense, at least among like the Plains tribes, the more nomadic tribes, that they were just stewards of the land. Yes, there were certain boundaries, that these are our ancestral hunting grounds or where we gather pine nuts or acorns, and other tribes have their valleys or their ranges. But the idea was, this does not belong to us. No one can own the land. That's why it was so shocking to the Indians when the whites offered to buy Manhattan Island off them. And that's the classic story. They bought it with glass beads, trinkets. And the Indians were just thinking, sure, if you want to give us something for it, because in their mind, you can't sell land. No, it's not like a bow or a bowl or a skin that you tanned. It's the land. It remains long after we're gone. And so part of the decision-making process of these people groups was, when you were going to do something that was going to affect the land or the forest or the animals, you collectively ask yourself, how will this affect the next 7 generations? Can you imagine? We barely ask how's it going to affect our children, let alone our grandchildren. Can you imagine if we went through that process? Like, what's the ramifications 7 generations into the future of us damming up this river, or us cutting down this forest, or us mining this mountain, or drilling for oil off the coast? And yeah, we can't tell the future per se, but we can make logical predictions of consequences. that we can observe. I was really taken in my youth by the Native American view of the land and of plants and animals. And to me, they seem to find this nice sort of like middle way between total disregard, or we can do whatever we want, and on the other end, not touching it, that we're a virus. Because the Native Americans felt integral. They were a part of the land. They were a part of the animal kingdom of the plants. They saw the animals as their brothers and sisters, and we all had the same Father God creator. One of my favorite bumper stickers I ever saw, I'd put it on my Jeep, but I know it would spin people up too much. It says, love your mother, and it had a picture of the earth, but worship your father, referring to God. And I was just so tickled by that, because it's not confusing the earth with being the creator, like Gaia, like a personification of Mother Earth, right? But it's acknowledging, look, our physical frame, our water, our air, all of that's coming from the earth. And when we die, our bodies, physical bodies, will go back to the earth from whence it came. But we also are spiritual beings. We have a creator, Father God, and that's who our worship is supposed to go to. Not the earth, not to other humans, other animals, but to the creator of all things. In my youth, I came across this book. I loved reading like how to identify edible plants and animals, and how to stalk and track things, make traps, how to gather herbs and treat acorns. And in my studies, I came across this guy named Tom Brown Jr., and he wrote a book called The Tracker. Man, this pen's bad. Oh.
Are you saying the pen may have sinned against you for not being appropriately
No, I may have
writing?
to into outer darkness. No, I think I just got stuff on more. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm putting this up. Why did the tree get cursed by Jesus? Yes, it wasn't bearing fruit like it was supposed to. And Jesus was like, fine, you're never going to bear fruit again, ever. And that's how I define sin. Not measuring up to God's standard, or not doing what God intended you to do. And in that case, if it's a fig tree that's supposed to be bearing figs and it's not, it's an evil tree. A fig tree that bears good fruit is a good fig tree. That's simple. Same with an animal. If an animal's designed to, I know that's not why dogs were designed, but let me just say, to be a companion and loyal and all that, and it turns on you and attacks your children or something, that's an evil dog. It's no longer a good dog protecting the family, being part of your pack. It's gone rogue and is now an evil dog. It's not that all dogs are good or evil, or all trees are good or evil, but based on their choices, and you're like, come on, Blackburn, trees don't make choices. Oh, yes, they do. Do you guys know that when you prune a tree, you're actually psyching it out? You're making it think it's going to die. And so it puts out a bumper crop of blooms that turn into fruit, because it's its last fling trying to get its progeny before it perishes. And we just keep freaking them out year after. That's why they get 1 year out of 7. You're not supposed to mess with them. Leviticus 19 is fantastic. Did you know there's uncircumcised fruit and you're not supposed to eat it? So the first 3 years a tree is growing, you're not supposed to eat the fruit because it's uncircumcised. And then on the 4th year, the fruit belongs to God. And then the 5th year, you're allowed to eat of the fruit.
We really only have like 2 years in fruit of the tree.
Well, the tree could live 30, 40
Yeah.
after that, and you can, except every 7 years, it gets a
Like
break.
before the Sabbath, you only have like 2 years.
No, you don't get, no, those first 3 years, no. That's all uncircumcised. Don't eat it.
Is this all fruit or?
Yes.
So you see, God was trying to.
Maybe vines are different because this is from trees, like tree fruit or nuts, I would assume.
No, I was just gonna say, God is trying to teach people, depend on me, I'll take care of you. And the problem seems to be, man says, no, we have to provide for ourselves. We can't wait for you, we're trusting for you. Yeah, the need for that.
Sure. But, and once again, I'm not trying to make utilitarian arguments, but when you talk to an arborist, they're like, yeah, you don't eat the fruit the first 3 years. Actually, they'll actually go in and pinch off the blooms and stuff because they don't want the tree putting its energy into fruit. They want it to put down deeper roots and grow stronger branches. And any fruit production is taking away from the root or the branch production. And so they will intentionally try to get trees not to bloom out for those first 3 years. Fascinating. Okay, where was I? Okay, Tom Brown, the tracker. So Tom Brown's this white guy, but he has like this Indian grandfather. I think it was like an adopted relationship. Some old timer in his area kind of took him under his wing. And he started to take him out and showed him how to track animals, how to learn about them, observe them. And one day he took him to this valley. And there was like a little creek running through the center of the valley. And on one side of the valley, the trees were all really close together. A lot of undergrowth, brush, kind of sickly, scrawny. But then right across the creek in the same valley, it was almost like a park. The trees were more spread out. They were bigger, healthier. And Tom Brown noticed there were also more animals and birds and stuff on this side of the creek. And he asked his grandfather, he says, "Grandfather, what's going on? We got this one side where things are all gnarly and overgrown, and on this side, it just looks like a lush garden." And his grandfather said, "When I was your age, I came into this valley and I became the steward of the side of the creek you see that looks like a park. And so whenever I needed like a new bow or arrows, I would go in and I would thin and I would selectively take certain trees, like in a conscious stewardship sort of way. He would take out the disease stuff. He would clear out the fire stuff. And so his idea was, we're not a virus. We're not supposed to just stay away from it. But if we interact and work with nature, we can actually make it healthier and better. And that's the thing with humans, right? Within just a couple of years, we could bring great devastation or great restoration, depending on how we put our efforts into a landscape. Now, I like the idea of preservationism because so much has been influenced by man. So I love having national parks or wilderness areas where it was just like, let's just let it be so we can see what it looks like. But I want to be able to go in there and see what it looks like. I don't want to be completely banned. But then other land, how can we interact with it where we're not being abusers or destroyers, but we're using the resources, whether that's wood or plants or animals or fish, but not in a destructive, eliminating entire species sort of mentality. And the simple rule is kind of like, you take what you need and you leave the rest. You don't exploit the environment or the community. And that's the problem is, it's like one of my favorite movies or books, the Lorax. I know Dr. Seuss is under pressure lately, but I'll always love him for the Lorax. And if you remember Sneed, his whole idea was, hey, everyone needs a truffula. And it's right there, it's free, there's the truffula trees. And the argument was, yeah, but don't you understand, if you don't check your voracious appetite for this product that you're selling for money and profit, a point's going to come where there are no more truffula trees. And he was having a moment, Sneed was having a moment of conscience. And then the little voice in his head said, yeah, but if you don't do it, someone else will. And please don't let that be your justification for anything in your life. Like, well, I know it's bad, but if I don't do it, someone else is going to do it. So it might as well be me. Don't let it be you. And once again, I'm not opposed to wood, or I love beautiful wood and all that, but what is your relationship to those things? Are you being respectful to the Creator and his creation? Are you being a preserver and a steward? I tell my friends, my radical preservationist friends, that I'm even more radical than them, because I call myself a restorationist. I want, and that comes from Romans 8, this idea that I want, as I am reconciled to God, I want to reconcile even the creation to him. And in my worldview, I think Christians should be the biggest environmentalists of everybody, because we actually believe our Father made the world. This shouldn't be some like liberal left-wing hippie movement. This should be people who believe our Father made this. This is our dad's stuff, and we're going to treat it respectfully. It's as simple as that to me. Let me read this passage from Romans 8 for you. Romans 8, I'm going to start in verse 18. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. For the creature was made subject to vanity, or to the curse, not willingly, but by reason of him who has subjected the same in hope. Because the creature itself shall also be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and travails in pain together until now. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruit of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. For we are saved by hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why does he yet hope for it? But if we hope for what we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. And when I'm hiking in the woods, I actually tell the plants and animals, rejoice and have hope, for your redemption draweth nigh. Because I see myself as like an ambassador or a first fruits of this creation. And I actually help the trees and stuff. We do praise songs together. I help them clap their boughs, and we just sing to our Creator and the love we share together. And once again, I'm saying I'm not opposed to harvesting or using trees or having a wood fire or wood in my home, but my mentality is I'm kind of like this guy. I'm thinking about how can we do this in a way that is beneficial for the entire forest? It's not just me being greedy. I'm taking care of my fuel, my heat, my cooking needs, or my shelter needs, but I'm also making for a healthier environment for not only the trees, but the plants and animals that are in the forest. And that's kind of like the vision I have of being a steward. And I don't know theologically how to reconcile it's all going to burn and a new heaven and a new earth, and Romans 8, the reconciliation. And like I said, I can't imagine a world without death and decay and regeneration. but I'm looking forward to it. Another book I was reading at the same time, and I think I'm going to end with this, was this medicine man named Rolling Thunder. Bob Dylan actually traveled with him for a while on the Rolling Thunder Review. If you want to check out some of those old tunes from the 60s, it's a romp. And Rolling Thunder was being taught by his grandfather. Like they'd be walking through the woods and they'd come across like a blackberry bush or something, and he would just reach out and grab a berry and eat it. And his grandfather would be like, "Going, how rude." And he'd be like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "How'd you feel if I just came up and pulled your ear or pulled some hair off your head?" And he's like, "What are you talking about? It's a berry bush." And his grandfather said, "Yeah, but it actually is a living being. Those are its berries. They're not your berries." And he says, "How about asking permission next time?" And I don't know, that just so resonated with me as a young man. And to this day, I do not pick fruit or berries from trees without asking permission.
How do you get the permission?
Well, they obviously don't speak English. So it's more of an intentionality, like my respect to the plant and its autonomy, that it doesn't belong to me. Those are your berries, but would you mind if I have some? And when I go to grab a berry, if it easily comes off in my hand, that means a yes. And if it resists, that means no, that berry's not for you. I'm like, okay, you're good. And I move on. What do you think about that?
You do you, Fred. You do you.
But
I think there's
think of how we food in this country. Like we have rows of trees, right? Just these orchards of all orange trees or walnuts or apples or pears. And we just treat them basically like indigenous servants or something, or slaves. And they belong to us. We take the fruit when we want to take it. We water them when we want to water them. We fertilize them when we want to, but they belong to us. They're like our property. And that's, I guess, where my mentality has totally changed. I don't see plants and animals belonging to me anymore. I don't believe in pets. I have free roaming companions that live in my home with me that are under my care, but they don't belong to me. I didn't make that cat or that dog or that snake. I feed them, I take care of them, I make sure they're behaving themselves and not running amok. But yeah, I don't own them. I don't own other humans. I have plants all over my home and yard, but I'm like their caretaker.
What gives you the authority to like make sure that they behave though, if you don't own them?
Oh, like at my household? That's a good question. Because I certainly don't want to say because I'm bigger than them. That because I pay the bills. I don't want to say that.
maybe because God gave you dominion over them.
That's true. In this sense, I guess I'd look at it almost like being a parent. And I'm not saying my animals are my children. I don't look at them as my children. But there are certain like kind of rules of conduct to keep peace in the home. And that's what I hold them to.
Are you trying to subject those animals to the law? Don't you know we're under grace, Fred?
Well, I give them rules because I want harmony in my home. And if anybody's acting out, person, cat, dog, snake, they're going to have to do a timeout so they can get it together. I do. My cat, though, is such a hunter. I feel so bad. I might have to get a bell for it because I don't mind him getting the rodents, the gophers and all that, but oh, it makes me sad when he gets the birds. You don't want him to get the birds. But that's part of the fall too, that if you look at the Genesis account, even beasts of prey today were vegetarian. It said the fruit of the trees and the seed of the grasses or whatever, that shall be meat for you. And we don't have any account of even humans eating meat until after the flood. Fascinating. Now, I'm sure humans ate meat before the flood, but I don't think that was the intentional design.
Probably did take like a psychological change though to start eating animals. Like even after it was like, well, death happens now and you can eat animals, and God killed the lamb for or whatever for their clothes. Like still, like if you've been eating only vegetables and stuff, it'd be like, wait, we're gonna eat this thing now? Like I wonder when they started, like their children or their children's children.
Probably pretty soon.
It's kind of interesting because like right now, something I'm working through is like the stewardship of money.
Yes.
And so I kind of relate to that in my mind of like what he was talking about, like if we're just gonna use it and like gobble it up or like just use it however we want, and it's like we're not having faith in God that He's going to provide. And it's like with money, one thing I've been taught is that it's like free flowing. It's meant for you to use. It's meant for you to give back to God, to offer it. But it's not, you don't have to collect it and hold on to it. Like it's free flowing. It'll come, it'll go. And then it's like when you don't have any, you have faith in God. When you do, you still have faith in God. And so it's kind of like that with the earth. Like it's not ours. We can use it, but we're not meant to hold on to it and have it. It's like it's free flowing.
Yeah, I love that. And what great, and you might say, well, why should we just leave all these places untouched? Well, I'll tell you, when you go into these places where you cannot see the works of man's hands, but it's just the work of God, you can learn some profound things of the way God made things work. Like that analogy you just gave, or that example of money, I mean, that's how I look at water. When water is hoarded, like the Dead Sea is a great example. You have this fresh, sweet water of the Jordan flowing into it, but because it has no outlet, it just collects and then it evaporates and it gets saltier and more minerals until literally it becomes a sterile environment that nothing can live. And think about your own lives, the blessings and goodness and gifts and talents God has poured into you. If you don't tilt your cup and let that flow out into the world around you, your friends, family, acquaintances, coworkers, you're going to become, it could be the sweetest, purest water, but if you don't let it out, it's going to stagnate. It's going to become foul. It's going to become putrid. And we need to have those tilted cups where we flow. We let the flow, and that's a covenant I have made with God since my youth. I said, as long as you keep pouring, I'm going to keep my cup tilted. But when you stop giving, I won't have anything to give because it's all coming from you. And it's been a wonderful relationship. And sometimes my cup's been dry, but most of the time, God just keeps a steady stream coming. And there's even things to learn in the dry times, right? Of waiting or dependence upon God. Yeah, I love the Native American idea because a lot of people are this like, well, should we not eat meat or animals or that sort of thing? And I don't go that far. And part of it is because of my respect for the Native Americans. And they called it the giveaway. And this idea was, yes, other things have to give their lives so that we can live. But one day we too will give up our lives and other things will live for what remains. That's why I hate the way we bury, I know I'm ranting now, how we bury people in this country for the most part, where we embalm them or we try to put them in this cryogenically sealed caskets where they can't rot or decay. I want to return to the earth. I'd be more than happy for my body to be eaten. I mean, I'm hoping I'll die out in the wilderness where I'll just get to go back into it and I don't have to get put into some like box or hole in the wall or something like that. Because myself is my spirit and I'm going to get a new body. I'm not worried about this. I'm more than happy to go back into the earth. And
have you seen those tree like planter things? So they get cremated and all your ashes become like the soil for the tree seed or whatever.
They just put your whole body in a pod and a tree grows out of you. But that's That's like my pagan ancestors. I'm from Celtic background. And if you go to Celtic graveyards, they're orchards because they plant trees on all the graves. And so as the body returns to the soil, it also goes up into the tree and into the fruit. And I'm hip with that, but not from a pagan sense, but from a more Christian sense.
Fred just wants to be soylent. I get it. That's okay.
Anyways, love your mother, worship your father, be respectful, don't be a destroyer or a waster. Conserve what we have, but also don't worship the creation. And that's the big key for me, to be respectful, to be a caretaker, not to be a waster or greedy, but we're also a part of it. We're not a virus. We were meant to be a part of this world. We were made from the earth of this ground. And when we eat and breathe, all of that is incorporated into us. And I just love that aspect. And I think it can all be an act of worship. Think about when you eat. I'm going to end with this. This is from Khalil Gibran. He was a Lebanese poet. And he wrote this thing. People were asking about, well, what about food? What should we do? Because we have to eat. And he said, oh, that you could just be like an air plant and live off the air around you, and that you didn't have to kill in order to live. But he said, but since we can't just live off the air, I mean, there are aeritarians that just live off the fragrance of things, but they don't last long. My next favorite is fruitarians, and the Orthodox ones won't even pick fruit. They'll only eat fruit that has dropped from the tree. There's a few of them, but not many. But Khalil Gibran, kind of like the Native Americans, he was like, it's more of an attitude. So like, if I have to kill a chicken so that I can eat, when I eat that chicken, I should say to that chicken, may you cluck in the barnyard of my soul. And when I eat that apple, may I say to that apple, may you grow in the orchard of my heart. When you eat that filet of fish sandwich, may you say, may you swim in the ocean of my spirit. And it turns eating into an actual act of worship and communion with the creation and the creator. And it becomes one of respect. And it doesn't even just have to be what you're eating. Think about the people that prepared it, the people that sold it, the people that transported it, the people that harvested it, the people that grew it, all the chain of people that brought that bite of food into your mouth. And we're being present when we're eating. It becomes like an act, like a sacrament. Oh, that's another thing. Well, since my heresies are flowing today, does anyone know what a sacrament is? Most Protestants have 2, Roman Catholics have 7. Yes, the means of grace. Well, I personally am a pan-sacramentalist. Anyone know what that means? Pan for all, which means I believe seeing a sunrise in the morning or drinking water from a mountain brook can be a means by which I receive God's grace. And the whole creation is declaring his glory. I love to call it God's wordless book or letterless book, because when you look out at the creation, you can learn, just like an artist. Like if you have a favorite band or a favorite artist, you could hear a new song from them and know it's your band, right? Because there's a certain style, a certain feel. And that's how I feel about creation. When I'm in creation, I'm just like, oh, God, you are just wowing me. I can't believe, like, look at how the color composition and the purple and yellow flowers and the Fibonacci sequences from the nautilus shells to your thumbprint to pine cones. And you just see all of this incredible design and purpose. And I just want to say, glory, glory. And to me, that's like my true church. My holy temple is not built by human hands. It's out there with my creator. And thank God he's allowed me to ebb and flow. I love you guys too and teaching, but I could not do this if I wasn't able to spend lots of time out in the wilderness where my soul is replenished and restored. So love God, take care of his creation, take care of each other. And I think that's good for today.
Amen.
Amen.